Welcome to Catholic Publishing 101, a podcast of the Association of Catholic Publishers, better known as the ACP. Our goal is to give Catholic authors and editors insights into the challenges and obstacles in publishing Catholic content. I'm your host, Therese Brown, the Executive Director of the ACP, and today we have a very special guest joining us to discuss an alternative to traditional and self-publishing called Author Investor Initiative. So please welcome Greg Pierce, publisher at Active Publications and editor of many books, including those by the great Catholic writer Brian Doyle. Greg takes what I would call an entrepreneurial approach to publishing that includes looking at different ways for authors and publishers to collaborate. So, Greg, it's great to have you on the show.
Good to see you, Therese.
So, our audience is familiar with many of the issues around traditional and self-publishing. And those of you who are listening, if you need a reminder, check out our episodes on traditional versus self-publishing and scams in self-publishing at the ACP YouTube channel. So, Greg, let's start with a basic compare and contrast question to give us some context to better understand this option. How does the Author Investor Initiative differ from both traditional publishing and self-publishing?
Well, I want to say up front that I come at this from both sides. I've published about 8 or 9 of my own books, several of them with other publishers. And then I've published about 300 books myself through Active Publications of other people. So I understand the issue, or the issues plural, between authors and publishers in the first place. And so as I've been doing it, I always did traditional publishing. I never did self-publishing. But what traditional publishing meant was that the publishing house took all the risks, financial risks, time risks, everything. And then the author got a relatively small royalty. You know, traditionally 8%, 10%, 12% at the most.
Wow.
And at least that's true in Catholic publishing. I don't know if it's true everywhere. I guess if your name is Obama or Oprah Winfrey or something, you maybe get better royalty. But it was always that amount because the publishers argued that they had to put up all the money for the editing, even for finding the book sometimes, for the editing, for the design, for the printing, for the storage, for the marketing. And they were right in a lot of ways. And one of the things a lot of authors don't understand is that, at least with bookstores, they're taking 40 or 50% of the cover price for starts. So a lot of people are surprised by that. But if I send a book to Amazon or to Ingram or to any of the bookstores that we work with, I'm giving them anywhere from 40 to 50%, and they're all returnable. That's the other thing. They're all returnable. So it was hard, and that really justified, the 10%. And it's also true that a lot of authors aren't in it for the money. Some are, and if they are, they're printing or publishing multiple books, and that's why you'll very often find when a publisher and an author work together well, they will publish all of or as many as they can of an author's books, and the author wants to go with the publisher because they're confident in them. They're also used to how they work and things like that. But a few years ago, it occurred to me that there were a lot of books not being published by anybody, not just by me, that really deserved being published, but they were too much risk. And these are books that are very personal books or things like that. Some of your listeners will remember the priest Donald Cousins. And Donald died, Father Cousins died, right during COVID, very quickly. And he had just finished a trilogy of novels with us. As I look back on it today, because I was working on this today, and it really struck me the serendipity of him coming to us, wanting to do novels instead of his usual. He wrote lots of other stuff for other publishers, but nobody would publish his novels. And neither would I. And neither could I, because I didn't know if I could sell them. I had to get an outside editor because I'm not a fiction editor. And we actually formed a little subsidiary of ACTA called In Extenso Press about 10 years ago, where I had a partner just in that part of the business. And we came up with this idea of the Author Investor Initiative together.
Cool.
And so what what we said was, if an author can help with the uh, finances, the upfront finances, we could afford to give them a better royalty. And so that's the basic difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing. And this is sometimes called hybrid, but I'm not sure that many of the hybrid ones actually give the bigger royalties.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what worked for us because it was fair. It was fair to the author and it was fair to the publisher. So I got a couple of stories as usual
Go for it.
to exemplify this. So I have one author. His name is Father Patrick Hannon. He's a Holy Cross priest that now teaches out at the University of Portland. And back in the day, I don't know what that means, but back in the day, when he first came to him, I was the one that came to him and said, you should be publishing your stories because he was giving great homilies at the parish church I was going to. And he'd always wanted to, but he never thought about it. He's very young at the time, maybe 35 or something. And so I convinced him. He wrote 3 different books for me, collections of short stories, and he got 10% royalties. And I paid up for everything else. And it worked
Mm-hmm.
fine. It worked fine. But recently, so then, he went on to other things and he hadn't published in a while and he published for another couple other publishers. But he calls me on the phone and he says, Greg, I got this great book about the Our Father. And but it needs to be published in 6 months because I have a whole speaking engagements on this topic in
Oh,
6
wow.
months. And I said, well, thanks a lot, Pat. You want to jump in front of everybody else. But I was interested. I knew he was a good writer. I like him as a person and as a friend. And so I said, well, I could do it if you could participate in this author investor initiative. So he said, well, what's that? And I explained it to him. And he says, well, I'm a priest. I don't have any money. And my reaction was, you probably have more than I do. But I said, I know you don't have any money, but your brother does. And so he called back a week later and goes, you're right. My brother will fund it. So his brother, for his real brother, he was fine with paying us. It's not a large amount of money. It usually ranges from about $3,000 to $6,000, depending on the length of the book itself.
Mm-hmm.
But he put up that money, and I think Father Pat has already gotten half of it back already in
And
less than a year.
less than a year. Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
And if it continues to sell the way I think it's going to, he could do very well. He could do better than he would have done at the 10% royalty. So he's getting 15% royalty instead of 10% royalty. And so therefore he's making whatever money he's making is paying that off. But it also allowed me to say, okay, I can put you in front of some other people.
Mm-hmm.
We can get this done. And then the second thing then before I agreed, and this is another difference between self-publishing especially and what I call author investor publishing. You don't buy the right to publish your book the way as if you're making all the decisions. We still
Mm-hmm.
apply every single criteria all the way through the process. First of all, we have to like the book.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't like it, we're not going to do a good job with it. We're not going to do a good job of selling it. And secondly, we have to think how it's going to sell, because even though they're putting up some money, if it doesn't sell very much, nobody makes anything, and that's really difficult to run a company that way. Although you can make up for it in volume. That's the old joke. But no, we want to make money. I don't want an author that doesn't want to make money, because then that says to me, they just want to get up. I kid that the first book that you publish, the first copy of a book you publish, costs about $5,000 or $6,000. The second one is like $5. The first one is the expensive one. So here's the criteria that your listeners might want to know that I use to decide whether we would publish it or not. So we're not going to publish it just because you pay money, or you say, I'll pay you double. Nope, we're not going to publish it. So I want to know for every book, not just for author investor books, but for every book, 2 questions. Who is this for?
Mm-hmm.
Who is this book for? And then the second question is, what are you trying to convince them of or encourage them or persuade them to do? And I don't publish a book that the author can't answer that question.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I
Well,
mean,
it does make
yeah.
sense, but it's surprising how surprised the authors are,
Mm-hmm.
that they have
Yeah.
to actually give me an answer for that. So I'll continue with the Pat Hannon example just because it's a good one. He says, I asked him those 2 questions. He goes, well, it's for everyone. And so,
It's the marketing department's dreaded answer to
yes,
that
exactly.
question.
So I hung up on him. And he called me back in 5 minutes and he said, What did you hung up on me? I said, I can't publish a book that's for everyone. Who's
Mm-hmm.
it for? And I explained why I had to know that. He called me, it took a few days. He called me back and he says it's for people, young people in
Mm-hmm.
their 30s or 40s, maybe late 20s, certainly not 50s, who grew up in either the Catholic Church or some church and maybe were even active, but then they've fallen away from the church, but they still are what they call themselves actually is spiritual but not religious.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard
Sure.
that one.
Yep.
And
Oh yeah.
so uh, what he says is, he says, I've got a book for them because they are all searching for how to pray.
Mm.
And the Our Father is the perfect prayer
Mm-hmm.
for them. That's what the book's about.
That's a focused answer.
And so
That took a lot
then,
of thought.
well, but
Yeah.
what that meant was, first of all, I could accept it. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going to accept it just because his brother put up the money. I was going to accept it because I thought it could sell and be a good book. And so what he's trying to persuade them to do is pray and to pray the Our Father. All right. So having made those 2 decisions and decided, and they put up the money and we published the book and we moved up so it got done before he needed it,
Mm-hmm.
And recently we sold 500 copies to Notre Dame University
Oh wow.
because they were going to give it to all of their big donors.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a ton of
It
sense.
does. So,
Yeah.
but here's what the book's title is. His title was The Our Father.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that was going to sell to the people that are 20, 30, and 40 that he's trying to reach. But in the
Mm-hmm.
book was a phrase that he quoted from somebody else. I forget who it was, but who, upon arriving by boat to Malaysia, looked out and said, such dizzy natural happiness.
Wow.
That is the title of the book.
That's going to make me want to pick it up and actually look at it.
And the
Yeah.
subtitle is also very good, A Long, Loving Look at the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
But the best part is the front cover. Who's on the front cover? I'll give you a couple of hints. First of all, it's 5 individuals
Mm-hmm.
and they're all happy.
Okay, I have no
5
idea.
separate photos from the internet of
Mm-hmm.
happy young people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who are all happy about something. They're not together. It's 5 different
Mm-hmm.
pictures of going across the thing. So the book, now you're right. And you know who doesn't buy it? People in their 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Who buys it then?
Their parents,
Their
their
parents.
schools,
Mm-hmm.
their people that are trying to help them work through their religious mentors, spiritual directors, who knows. But uh, that's that's what I think most books are anyway. Most books are not bought by the people that buy them, or at least it's too hard to get to them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can say to them, this is a book for somebody in this situation. I have another example. A woman wrote a really nice book on grieving her husband's death. And it was about 5 years after the death.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a couple interesting things about it. One was that I think she has 50 different chapters, short chapters, 55 5-page chapters. Okay. But 3 of the 5 pages is a recipe.
Really?
Yep. And it's a recipe for one.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it's a recipe for 1 or 2 people. And so you can either make it and have somebody over. You can make it and put the next one in for the next day, and they're all gentle. So
Mm-hmm.
I we all agreed on the book and whatever. The title we came up with was Gentle Comforts,
Mm.
and it's a beautiful book. And the subtitle is um, for women experiencing the loss of their life companion.
Mm-hmm.
So the author and I had a big fight about whether it was for women or not,
And
and I won, and she now agrees with me because it's for women. It's we can say for women who have lost their. We could have said for spouses who have lost their companion, but it's not really aimed at men. It's aimed at
mm-hmm.
women, and it allows her to talk about things that women talk about in terms of this and the
Yeah.
recipes and whatnot. And so she said, well, how do I write it for women, just for women? And I said, well, start each chapter, 50 chapters, with sisters, the word sisters,
Mm-hmm.
comma. You're talking to your sisters. That's who it's for, and that's how we're selling it. It was there's a bookstore in Madison, Wisconsin, that it's the number one seller this year
Wow.
in that
That's
bookstore.
amazing.
I know.
Okay, I gotta ask you, I gotta kind of ask you some questions about this whole
Yeah.
option because you've given us some incredibly interesting examples of how that collaboration between the author and the publisher can make some real magic happen. I mean, the just like you said about the content, Father Cousins writing novels, going into a different genre. Um, there's there's a lot of risk. It sounds like risk is kind of one of the key things for a publisher. And you and I both, you've been a publisher, I've worked for a publisher, and risk is always an issue because publishing is not a cheap endeavor. And you put up a lot, like you said, you put up a lot of money up front. That first copy costs a lot of money. The ones that follow, not so much. And so you really have to have a high level of confidence about what you're producing, that it's going to sell, it has a market, people are going to buy it, people are going to tell other people about it, so you get that pass along and so on. So this is what I'm wondering. I'm thinking our listeners probably are interested. Let's kind of differentiate here between what are some of the advantages and the disadvantages of making this approach, because you're obviously really comfortable with this approach, but say I'm an author, I know that something I want to write is not what everybody thinks I'm good at, or it might not be exactly in the bailiwick of the publisher. How do I turn this option into an advantage with somebody who may not be as experienced with it? And then what are the disadvantages I need to be aware of? So if the answer is no, I know why they're saying no.
Yeah. And I always try to tell my authors that I don't take why I'm turning them down,
Mhm.
which many publishers don't do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think I would start at this between the difference between a large publisher and a small publisher. It's a decision that an author
Hmm.
makes. And I always make absolutely sure they understand that they're going with a small publisher with all the positives and all the negatives. And I say to them, I encourage them. I have had more than one author that I say, go try to get a big publisher. You want a big publisher. You think you have a
Hmm.
million bestseller here. That's what they're looking for. Go with them. And sometimes they do, but very often they can't get through the door,
Yeah, yeah.
because they're not experienced or whatever. But even a really good person might not be able to get this particular book sold. I had one presented to me last week. It was a baseball book, and the guy's published 33 other books. And I said, well, why won't you go with one of your other publishers? Because they don't want it. They don't think it's going to
Wow.
sell enough. Well, I said, well, why are you bringing it to me then? But here's the advantages of a small publisher. And then I'll give you the advantage of the large one. Or maybe I should give
Hmm.
them first. They got a lot more money
Oh yeah, for
for
sure.
marketing, for going to shows, for having a long list. They might have a whole marketing department. They may have, people that will help you sell your book. They'll hire somebody for an advertisement book person. I can't do any of that. I tell them right
Hmm.
up front, do not bring your book here if that's what you're looking for. Here's how we Here's how we market our books: primarily word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is to produce a book that's so good that if we get a few of them out there and get a few people to read it, it'll catch on like wildfire. Doesn't always happen though. I
Mm-hmm.
tell them I can't guarantee it'll happen, but it
Right.
does happen. We have
Right.
another book we did in this series called "The Mole at Vatican Council 2."
Yep.
And we
Read
did
that
we
one.
did a book club thing on your book club about it, and it is also selling well. But the when the author brought it to me, I said, you might want to take this to a big publishing house.
Mm-hmm.
That might work. He said, I've tried.
Hmm.
I can't get through the door. Okay, so that's the biggest positive to a smaller publisher. I don't have to have a meeting or multiple meetings with my entire staff, marketing, and everybody else. I don't have any of that. I just go over and get a glass of water and have a meeting with myself and decide whether or not I want to do it or not. But that's why the author investor thing has made it my life easier,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, they are taking some of the risk. And even if their book doesn't sell, they at least get the book they want.
That's a good point.
They get the book they want. I can't tell you how many people that go to big publishers come back and say, well, it's not really the book I wrote or wanted to
Mm-hmm.
write. And so, but on the other hand, they wanted it edited,
Mm-hmm.
and they want it well edited. And they're not only talking to the publisher when they're talking to me, they're talking to their editor.
Mm-hmm.
And each author's different in how they want to be dealt with. You know, some want heavy editing, some want no editing. So, you have to work with them. But if those first two questions that I mentioned aren't clear, then it's impossible to edit.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
So that's the two where I see the difference is really not so much between author investor and large and small.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That actually makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
What do you think is the um, what's the approach do you think that an author takes to a larger publisher if they're interested, they're willing to put up some of the money, they're willing to be that investor. Um, what's like, what's the conversation starter that they might use to get it, at least into the conversation with that acquisitions editor or whoever they're talking to?
Well, unfortunately, the answer is have an agent.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the ways large publishers just get rid of a lot of people is just say, well, you have to have an agent. Well, it's almost as
Yeah.
hard to get an agent as it is to get a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, get stopped right there. But the other thing is, so much of large publishing is based on celebrity, what's in the news, what's and what the genre is. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you've got a murder mystery, you shouldn't bring it to a small publisher.
Yeah.
You should try it. But here's another thing that happens: they bring it to a smaller publisher, and it's a success. Well, then they go to they go to a bigger publisher the second time, and the agents are falling over them. I
Yeah.
mean, one example of that would be the Harry Potter series.
Oh, for sure.
You know,
So it sounds like one of the things you're suggesting is that going to a smaller publisher and maybe saying, I'm willing to put up a little bit of money as an investor in this project, especially if it's not just a one off title. If you're somebody who really is committed to doing writing in whatever your genre
right?
is, going to that publisher and saying, Here,
Hmm.
I'm willing to try, spend some of my own money to get this out there. And the kind of the long term game plan in mind might be that if this is successful, then now I've got something that I can then take to a medium sized publisher and say, hey, I've got a second book in this series, or I've got a second book in this genre. I've had the success here. Will you talk to me? Would they be more likely
Yeah,
to
and,
talk
and
to you
you,
at that point?
yes, of course, that's true. But it's also true. Here's another thing that's true. I get a
Hmm.
lot of people. I always say to people, you want to be the person who wrote the book on the subject that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's a lot of people that are that. In other words, they only
Hmm.
have one book in them,
Yeah.
and they only need one book. So if they get a book published, they are that person. Then they are
Hmm.
that author. And so what they're doing it for, not so much is to sell the books, which they want to do, but I want them to do, but also they want to be able to say, I'm the author of that book.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
So somebody that's I don't know, name any subject. Somebody who's a spiritual director.
Hmm.
They may not want to be an author, but they want to be a well-known spiritual director that has a specific thing that he or she wants to talk about, that
Yeah.
he or she is good at, that is new or different. And if they publish that book, and I can help them do that. See, that's the other advantage I guess I didn't mention enough, was that we can move a lot faster.
Yeah, it's well, when you were talking about how that author of yours came to you and on the whole Our Father book and basically wanted you to push that book into the front of the line because he had the 6 month time frame. When we talked about the acquisitions process with Rebecca Martin, one of the things she mentioned was at a lot of the larger houses, the publishing timeline is 18 months to 2 years. And that just, I think for a new author or one time only author, is just exasperating because that seems like such a long time span and you may never see the end of it. It just seems very
Well,
daunting.
you'd be surprised how much of that I get from people that have already gone through that. They've actually had a book
Mm-hmm.
accepted, spent a couple years with a publisher, and they either go out of business or they say we changed our focus. We're sorry.
Yeah.
Keep your advance if they gave them an advance. I don't give any advances. It's
Hmm.
almost a negative advance. I'm asking you to give me money. But
Well, but like you said, if you use this investor initiative process, that the royalty, then you're able to give them a higher royalty because they've already put some money in at the start, kind
exactly,
of some walking the talk and saying I believe in this so much that I'll help underwrite it and get it moving out there.
yeah. And so when I sign a contract with people under the author investor initiative, I guarantee, not guarantee, but I promise them, should be the same thing, but that we'll get it out within a year.
That's a doable time frame.
Yeah,
That
within a
that's like
year,
I can see the
and I
beginning and the
say,
end of
and
that.
I'm not going to start working on it until January or February or March.
Hmm.
So I can only do about 6 or 8 of these a year, and make that promise, because I still do some under the traditional publishing.
Hmm.
I don't do anything under self-publishing.
Yeah.
There are so many self-publishers out there, and
Oh
the
yeah.
main negative I'd say is self-publishing is editing and design.
Yes.
I mean,
Being a big
I can
reader,
tell,
yes,
and so can any
absolutely.
customer,
Yeah.
if a book's been self-published,
Yeah.
no matter what they say. And
Yeah.
if they're saying you're editing, you're getting somebody that just graduated from college, who's you're going to edit your book to make sure the commas are all in the same place, but they're not going to do the kind of things we do.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. The difference between copy editing and developmental editing and what you need and what you don't need. And
Right.
well, yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so let's wind this all up. Um, you've done a great you've told us what it is. You've told us what the advantages are. You've told us some of the disadvantages. I think the stories that you've given us are really illustrative of kind of some different approaches to do that. I feel like our listeners probably have picked up a few tips on where to go next if they're interested in doing this, and how to deal with this with a small publisher, medium, and a large publisher, even if at all possible. So I'm kind of the last question, always a good last question is what would be your like last tip? Like maybe the one thing that you haven't been able to say, something that you kind of the inside look or uh, something that authors need to keep in mind when if they want to try to exercise this option.
Well, I'll get to the option in a minute. Don't let me forget to
Okay.
say that. But before that, I would say this: no one cares about you, the author. And I learned this a long, long time ago when I did a series of books on the death of a spouse, the death of a husband, death of a wife. It's a series that, and I published them all under the traditional thing. And the one I could never get was the death of a child,
Yeah.
because I couldn't find the right writer. They all wanted to tell the story of the death of their child,
Yeah.
and yet they had to know what the death of a child was. And so I found this woman, Elaine Stillwell, out in somebody recommended it to me, and she had been working. She had died. Two of her children had died as late 20s in a car crash, both at the same time. And of course, changed her life like it changes a lot of people's lives. But when she was writing the book, because I went to her and said, can you write this book? And I said, it's not about you and your children. It's about them and their children. Because she had gotten into, helping people and, whatever. And she was able to pull that off. And so she, in the very first introduction or whatever, she told her story in one chapter, short chapter, and never referred to them again. Because, that's what. So many authors that come to me think that they are good writers, and they are. Some are not, but some are very good writers. That's not the problem. The problem is they think that people, if a book comes to me that's written always in the first person, I almost never publish it.
Wow, that is actually a really, really good tip.
It's
in and of itself.
I got one today, and I read through it, and I thought, this is all about you, not about the reader. So when I get somebody to write a book now, I say, don't use the first person singular. Use the second person singular if you have to. Use you, and if you have to, use they. But don't think, unless you're Oprah Winfrey again or somebody famous, they don't care.
Yeah.
It's just the truth. All right. So when you're coming to a publisher, then first decide the two questions. Who's it for? Try to do this yourself, and then be open to what the author or what the editor is saying. Who's it for, and what are you trying to convince them about or persuade them to do? Secondly, make sure it's not all about you. And third, decide whether you want a large or a small publisher. Those are the three things. And then once you get to a small publisher, there are small publishers that'll still do it on the traditional way. I will still do it once in a while on the traditional way. I've done a couple this year on the traditional way. But they tend to be real short books that I can afford to do and can do quickly. But if it's a big book, I got to have some help, or I can't produce a good book.
Yeah.
So
yeah, makes sense.
That's what I would do.
Those are good tips, and actually pretty good tips just in general for especially new authors who have not been published before. So that's good. I like that. Taking a deep breath now. So first of all, thank you, Greg, as always, for sharing your expertise with us today. I always enjoy our conversations. I always get a great amount of information and a great amount of joy listening to the stories that you share with us. But before we close today, I have a few suggestions for you, our listeners. If you are an author, please consider joining the Association of Catholic Publishers as a content creator member to network with other Catholic publishing professionals. And you can go to CatholicPublishers.org and click on members and join now to do that. As you're well aware, if you're listening to this right now, we are here to help guide you in your journey in Catholic publishing. So watch more episodes in this series or explore other stories here at CatholicPublishers.org. And thank you to our listeners and viewers for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to Catholic Publishing 101 and leaving us a comment. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes, so feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and YouTube, or at our website at CatholicPublishers.org. And once again, thank you to our guest, Greg Pierce from Active Publications, for sharing his insights and expertise.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a joy, absolute joy. And so until next time, keep spreading the gospel in everything you do, say, and write. And be sure to join us next time for another exciting conversation on Catholic publishing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform or watching us on YouTube, be sure to tune in for another engaging episode. I've been your host, Therese Brown, and we'll see you next time on Catholic Publishing 101.